Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, April 9th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, Jed Lowry here with you on this episode. We get you caught up on a lot of injuries around baseball. A trio for the Padres. We'll talk about their depth and the implications of some of those injuries. Some longer-term ones for Ronaldo Lopez and Victor Robles. Also saw something that happened on Friday night that we're going to dig into with Jed. We know Jose Ramírez is an elite hitter, future Hall of Famer, most likely. Is he out there playing 4D chess? We're going to dig into why that came up in just a little while. We had some questions from our Discord as well, including one about why teams are so patient with switch hitters struggling from one side of the plate. So we'll dig into that and some unusual park factors as well. Gentlemen, let's get to it because this is a big rundown. I feel like we talked about Jackson Merrill to start last week's show because of his extension. He leads off again this week because he was placed on the IL with a right hamstring strain. Not a major injury, but just the kind of thing that piles up on a team like the Padres, because I think of all the things you worry about for the way this roster is constructed, is it's very top heavy. If the Padres are going to win the NL West or be a playoff team and be a dangerous team in October, part of it is having at least an average, if not an above average health outcome for the key guys in that lineup, like Machado, like Merrill, and like Fernando Tatis Jr., who we'll talk about here in just a moment.
Yeah, I mean, just to grab that string that you left hanging there at the end, I mean, Fernando Tatis took a swing and felt something in his surgically repaired shoulder that he had labrum surgery on in 2022. Jake Cronenworth got hit in the ribs and felt something tug or cramp in the same place. And so that was like a triple whammy for them in that game. Tatis and Cronenworth think they'll be back out there and without IL stints. We don't know that for sure right now. But when you look at how they ended the game, they've got Oscar Gonzalez, who they've called up, with the Jackson Merrill injury. Oscar Gonzalez went out and had an error, like his first opportunity in the game. Then they've got Brandon Lockridge. I guess Tirso Ornelas could come up at some point. These are not names like Jackson Merrill, Manny Machado, and Fernando Tatis Jr. So they're hurting a little bit there. I have a solution for them, perhaps?
Yeah, what's the solution?
Well, I'm just putting together yesterday's podcast with today's podcast. Masataka Yoshida.
Okay. Another suitor for Yoshida. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the key thing with San Diego, I think, is that they don't want to get over the lugs tax. So money would be part of the question. But since Yoshida hasn't provided much value defensively in the field, he may not cost as much as people expect. He is a good batter. They could just use a good batter, play Sheets more in the outfield, just stick him in at DH basically, and have fewer sort of spots to fill. Plus, he's a pretty good hitter. I mean, I think as a hitter, he's a good hitter. So may not cost that much in money, may not cost that much in prospects, may be the kind of roster spackle they need right now.
I could sign off on that. Yeah, you can imagine a scenario in which the Red Sox eat a large portion of the money still owed to Yoshida in order to make it happen. And maybe the Padres are willing to give up some young, far away from the big leagues talent to get it done. Jed, do you share our concern about the position player depth, especially for this Padres team? NL West has been off to a phenomenal start so far. Padres actually a half game up on the Dodgers and Giants as play begins on Wednesday. But is that a potential flaw in the build of AJ Preller and company?
Yeah, but I think everybody is bound by the resources that they're provided, and I think to be competitive in arguably the most competitive division in baseball, you're going to have that top end talent, and then it's the secret sauce of trying to keep everybody on the field. So, I think the Jackson Merrill one hurts. Obviously, you're coming off of the excitement of signing the extension. Hamstrings can be tricky. So, I think they're going to want to get that right. And, the other guys, obviously very impactful. Fernando, anytime there's surgery involved, it makes you a little more nervous. Cronenworth, if it's a hit by pitch, I'm not nearly as concerned. Obviously, that's probably more of a day-to-day thing. But with Tatis, obviously they need to make sure that he is doing everything that he can to keep that surgically repaired shoulder strong and stable. And then they just got to get the hamstring thing right, because these guys are top end talent that not only are they going to produce, but they're going to people tune in to see these guys play.
Yeah, I mean, then they can play at MVP levels, which is really important for a roster built the way this one is built. Tatis off to a great start so far this year. He's got a couple of homers, 5 for 5 as a base stealer, striking out less early on, just doing everything that the Padres need him to do if they're going to hold that sort of position in the division.
For what it's worth, Tatis in Dennis Lin's story did say that he felt this before while working out. So maybe labrum surgery just produces outcomes where there's always like a little bit of weakness or a little bit of, potential pain there. And you just have to step off of it for a couple of days and, do your flexibility exercises, do your band work and try to get back in there.
Yeah, I mean, Jed, you dealt with plenty of injuries over the course of your career, and I think it's a larger bucket than many of us on the outside assume of things that require maintenance, things that don't feel right, even though they're fixed, even though they don't put you back on the IL necessarily. They're still occasionally barking. They're still causing you some kind of problem on a day-to-day or at least a week-to-week sort of level. So is it fair to assume that's something that Tatis is always going to be dealing with in some capacity, given the severity of that procedure?
Without question. There's going to be a maintenance routine that he's going to have to, stay on top of. The club obviously will have a plan for him. They're going to have a lot of experience dealing with that type of injury. But there, without question, and that's something even today that I deal with.
Yeah, what do you deal with today? What
yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, you name it, right? Like whether that's my sublux left shoulder, or my surgery on my knee, or my left wrist surgery. My thumb, I tore a ligament in my thumb. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of little things that if you don't keep it moving and keep it strong and stable, then you're just encouraging more uncertainty and more potential damage.
Yeah, hopefully this will turn out to be a precautionary small thing with the early removal for Tatis. And as you said, with Cronenworth, it was a hit by pitch. It wasn't like an oblique or something like that where it could turn into something more serious. So that's probably day to day as well. Injuries biting teams around the league, not just the Padres, though. We learned that Ronaldo Lopez will be shut down for 12 weeks following arthroscopic shoulder surgery. So they're still hopeful he'll get back at some point late this year. I just saw arthroscopic shoulder surgery in the one update. Yeah. So usually with the scopes, it's a shorter timetable than that. So they got in there and found something to use a medical
But it's also
term.
12 weeks is not quite like they didn't repair a labrum. Because then
no, definitely not a labrum at 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the scope is, really just the incision is smaller, right? So it's less time for the actual, cut to heal. And if they didn't announce what they did on the inside, 12 weeks might be it.
Big deal.
Yeah.
The good news for Atlanta, though, is Spencer Strider is scheduled to make his last rehab assignment before activation. Could go 90 pitches in that outing, so they will get one of their aces
aces
back.
He's got 90 pitches. I'm throwing him in the big leagues, man.
Not even giving him the rehab assignment. Just say, you're done. We're going to throw you back in. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one. That seems like an odd choice.
Yeah, I mean 90. Obviously you want to build a guy up, but 90 pitches, and the stress at the major league level is much different. So 90 pitches at the minor league level is different than 90 pitches at the big league level. It's just the eyeballs, like the eyeballs of the nation, of the cameras of the major leagues, just weigh a lot more. And so
also just try and throw harder, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, I could get behind the idea of sending him to the minor leagues for a 90 pitch start, just to make sure you have that, the actual workload built up. So once the environment, the stress environment of the major leagues gets added to the equation, at least you have that baseline of pitch count, work build up to go from.
Yeah, I guess so.
Good news, though, for Atlanta that he's back soon, at least. A little earlier than expected, too. I think late April was the previous timetable they'd thrown out back in the spring when Strider was starting to ramp up. We learned that Victor Robles is out at least 12 weeks. He suffered a small fracture in the humeral head of his left shoulder, made a fantastic catch against the Giants on Sunday, but paid the price in doing so. And we were talking before the show about this, Jed. I mean, some of that is just completely bad luck, right? He kind of fell into the netting and then hit the wall after that. And it's one of those things where the safety barrier there to help people not get hit by fatted balls ends up being a thing that causes a problem for a player in a very unexpected way, because you jump into a net kind of expecting one thing to happen and something different happens.
Yeah, I think I would say that he launched himself into the net. And I don't think I don't think if that's brick with padding on it, he's going after that ball in the same way. And so I unfortunately once again highlight catch, and everybody's going to be talking about it. But Derek, you said it. He paid the price for it, and I think his approach to that catch was changed probably by the netting as opposed to being a fence.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think it's like just maybe we have to think a little differently about the edges of the field, because we've seen occasional flea. You can't prevent everything. I think the worst one I think of is the Dustin Fowler White Sox injury. That was a bad fluky one. He ran into like an electrical box on the side of the field or something.
But even Judge's toe, like the base of the wall. I mean, some of these seem like unforced errors. Like, come on, if there's cement somewhere, like do more than put like an inch padding around it. Like, oh, that'll do it. That's fine.
I mean,
will find that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't prevent everything. Those those seeds, that netting down there, I get it. And you just it's just one of those unfortunate events where the player probably felt he was probably at less risk because of the netting and being able to jump into it, and it backfired.
Yeah. One thing I do think about, though, is Jackie Bradley Jr. Once did this thing, I think it was on MLB Network, about how to make like to highlight real catches. And one thing that he said was, when you're in the air, you have to relax. Like, you have to jump and then just sort of relax your body for impact, as opposed to, a lot of the way we break wrists. I think about this with the kids, and like, one of my kids broke his wrist, is like you like put your hands out.
You brace yourself. Yeah.
You brace yourself. You put, like, especially with skateboarding and skiing, you put your hands out and then you break your wrist. And so Bradley Jr. was like, don't put your hands out. Don't put anything out that like sticks out in a weird way. Don't brace. Like, just turn into a sack of balls, and just like, get that ball and then just sort of relax into yourself and fall down. I think like that sort of reaction you could maybe train, or you could hear him say that and be like, oh, I could maybe think that it could be a cue for you, but it probably doesn't work when you're running at a net, because your brain doesn't know. It's like good and bad. Like, the net that we see through the net is good, but then it is a thing. So like your brain might be like, there's no net there, like I gotta just go, and then at last minute is like, oh, there is a net here, or the brain is like, there's a net there, it's gonna catch me.
Right. Yeah. And those outfielders, they're out there in during batting practice, or they've played in those stadiums hundreds of times. They know what those surroundings are, and that's why I say, if that ball happened, is hit at Wrigley Field and there's a brick wall there, he's approaching that catch very differently than with a net there. And so, or the potential to make that catch. So I think the net was accounted for. So yes, in the moment, he's thinking to himself, I have this net here. Basically, it's not a brick wall, it's a net. And so that was, I'm sure that was accounted for in his decision to go after the ball the way he did.
And situation in the game too. Critical point in the game. Also probably playing in and going all out on that one. For now, no surgery necessary for Robles. If that changes, he will end up missing the entire season. So we'll keep an eye on that in the weeks ahead. You mentioned being on the field during batting practice. Spencer Arrighetti fractured his right thumb. He got hit by a line drive while playing catch in the outfield on Monday. There's your other bizarro
I think he was shagging
injury.
fly balls. Don't shag fly balls, pitchers. You're not that good of an athlete. Let the position players do that.
Yeah,
they got to do something though, otherwise they're just sitting in the clubhouse playing cards.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, next time we'll probably just choose to sit in the clubhouse and play cards. I mean, that's a bad break. And a little bit like the Padres question, too. This is a time right now. They've got so many injuries. They got guys rehabbing back from long-term injuries like McCullers, Christian Javier's far away, Luis Garcia had a setback. The Astros don't have that depth right now. So this could end up being a pretty costly absence for Arrighetti, too, just depending on how long this actually goes.
Yeah, I don't know that what they can do. I guess they could do some bullpen games. Ryan Gusto has some interesting pitch shapes and has been good so far in low leverage, multi-inning outings. They've got, I think it's, don't they have Gracefo too? Is that them? I don't know. They got some guys that they can do, but what they really need is Lance McCullers to pitch better, because he's close. He just had like a 2-inning rehab stint, but he ended up walking like 4 guys against a strikeout or something. So, there's kind of surprising amount of eyes on Lance McCullers' next rehab start, I think.
I got a name for both of you. Miguel Ulola. He is just working his way back. He had a spring injury. He got hurt. He left early in the spring breakout game. He just pitched yesterday on Tuesday at AAA. Went a couple innings. So maybe a week or two from now, Miguel Alula is getting that shot.
This is 60 grade stuff, 30 grade command.
That is the profile I like
really
to bet
interesting
on.
to watch. It's probably not fun to face.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to step into the box against it. It's fun to watch.
Easy for you to say.
Right.
Very far away from it. So I'm completely safe in this situation. We did get some updates on some other injuries. Matt McLain goes on the IL with a left hamstring strain. That had slowed him down in recent days. So Santiago Espinal probably plays a bit more. Gavin Lux may play a little second base as a result of that. Ketel Marte out a series of weeks. Just use a number. A series of weeks with his left hamstring strain. So more Tim Tawa and Garrett Hampson for the time being. I think a series of weeks is long enough for Jordan Lawler to
talk right there.
Yeah. He's just trying to just pull a new word, and he said
for a length of
weeks.
time.
And Geraldo Perdomo moves up in the order a little bit for the D-backs. Zach Eflin, we talked about yesterday. It's an IL stint for a lat strain. It sounded like no big deal. Left early, pitched 6 innings last time out. Nope, IL, lat strain. So he's going to miss at least a couple of weeks. And we're also keeping an eye on Pablo López, who left in the 5th inning of his start against the Royals on Tuesday with a hamstring injury. Awesome.
Yeah, and lat strains are, they're actually pretty bad for a pitcher. They're in the shoulder region. They are sort of below it. They're not in the I don't know what the joint, so it's not like a labrum situation. But they're bad. And, we've got from legendary, shout out to B Smith. I was talking to somebody and he said, is your producer the legendary B Smith from KMBR? And I was like, yeah, he is a legend. So shout out to B Smith. He sends us the note that Justin Steele is on the 15-day injury list due to tendonitis in his left elbow. He's been dealing with that, so that's not great news for them. They don't have the most amount of depth either. I guess is that where Colin Ray ended up? Maybe Colin Ray, is in. Maybe he steps into the rotation. There's a little bit of news here that's kind of fascinating. Otherwise, oh my God, Wyatt Langford is on the they're just dropping left and right, dude. Wyatt Langford with an oblique strain. He left that game early. It's really hard to kind of react to each of these because you got to look at the depth chart and try to figure it out. None of these guys is replaceable. None of these guys, the teams have something going. I mean, does Evan Carter come up? That might be somewhat interesting, but here's a fascinating side story related to lat strains and injuries. Hans Kraus a pitcher for the Angels yesterday was on social media talking about how he was told by the team that they were releasing him, and then after they told him that they were releasing him, they told him he had torn his lat.
So how is that supposed to go, Jed? Are you supposed to communicate the injury information ahead of time and then IL the player, or like what? Is that a gray area?
Are there rules about this sort of thing? I don't know.
I would imagine that the union is going to get involved into that situation. I without knowing any of the specific timelines or diagnosis, I would not want to comment. I would just have to say that I'm guessing the union would like to see the fact pattern on that one.
Yeah, we're going to flag that as a suspicious story that we'll keep an eye on as well. But yeah, man, you said Evan Carter could come up. No, Evan Carter got hurt on a bunt attempt at AAA, so probably not Evan Carter.
Jeez, baseball.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think we're kind of maybe we found that tipping point of where the expected output is actually higher than what's possible in a 162 game season. There's something to be said and valued in availability. We can talk about potential and sprint speeds and exit velocities and swing speeds all we want. I mean, that's those are real, but availability ultimately is what's going to win. If you got to play the games, right? The show must go on. And so availability eventually has to be valued again, as opposed to just the pure output.
I think we're seeing actually some potential changes in behavior that might be related to this. I'm just looking at the velocity charts, and there are some really hard throwers that are throwing at a smaller velo this year. Somebody like Mason Miller, but there's some other some really hard throwers that are down a couple or down a tick, and I think some of it might be on purpose. I mean, Mason Miller going down to 99.5 that probably doesn't affect his outcomes that much, but it may affect his availability outcomes some. And I also think about, I think it was in his contract year, Bryce Harper. There was this whole thing about how he wasn't diving anymore, and it did affect some of his defensive numbers, but he was able to stay on the field all year in a platform year. And so you wonder if there are some toggles about going all out. It's really hard though. Like if you don't have that contract yet, and you aren't necessarily Bryce Harper, what if you're the 25th man on a roster? You're probably going to go pretty hard when they let you play, because
and especially if that's how you've been developed and how, you're being evaluated. I think all of these players are incentivized by, maximum output. And, I get it. It's very, it's very entertaining, and it's easier to project that. But like I said, at some point, availability has to, return to the equation.
One thing we've kicked around on this show over the years, Jed, is having a built-in off day every week. What if Mondays were just an off day throughout the entire season? It was a travel day, a rest day. And
154.
Get down to 154. There's a few ways you can try and tweak things, but even I think you could still probably get to 162 if Monday was just a built-in off day. And if you had a nagging injury coming out of the weekend, sit Sunday, Monday's a rest day, maybe you're back at it Tuesday. Maybe some of these shorter IL stints could go away, or maybe this is actually just a function of load management and teams realizing, hey, we do have to get these smaller injuries to calm down, as opposed to trying to wait 4 or 5 days and grinding back out there and risking the possibility of a setback and turning a grade 1 strain into a grade 2 strain, for example. But from a player's perspective, would just every Monday off, is that something that you think the league could ever reasonably entertain? Would it actually be good for player health?
Yeah, I mean, from a player health perspective,
Mental
I
health
would,
too.
yeah, I mean, from a just overall, right, like player health perspective, I think it'd be good. That's something that there's that's not as it's never as simple as just saying that, right? Like there's other considerations from a business perspective, the number of games that you have to from the owner's perspective, you're losing 4 home games, and that's it in that scenario. So there's more than one way to look at it. But from a player health perspective, yeah, I think the majority of injuries end up, or historically, I should say, have been from overuse. And that's where I said it earlier, but if we've kind of crossed this threshold where now you're talking about more, traumatic, I don't know if traumatic is the right word, but more, single instant injuries because the output is so high, because guys are bigger, stronger, faster, as opposed to the wear and tear of a season. Because we're what, 2 weeks into this season. It's not like we're in the dog days at this point. So yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword. Yes, I think that for player health, having an off day would be beneficial, but then I'd still think availability has to be a part of the equation moving forward, because, do players now go even harder if they know they have an off day on the other 6 days, right? So nothing is as straightforward as we want it to seem, but it needs, like I said, I think talking about availability and valuing that, I think is where, the discourse should probably go.
Yeah, and the training and how that could be impacted, and yeah, there's a ton of ways to pull on those threads. More topics for a future day, I think. Probably a good off-season conversation. Some very sad news out of the Dominican Republic. A roof collapsed at a nightclub. 113 people have passed, at least at the time of this recording, including former big leaguers Octavio Dotel, Tony Blanco, I believe the sister of Nelson Cruz, was one of the victims of this tragedy as well. Just a horrible situation. Just a nightclub dance party that just turned into a tragedy.
Yeah, it really sucks. Dotel was really, really kind of upbeat guy. Did you ever cross paths with him in Oakland? I think he was there.
Never as a player, but against him, and never heard a bad thing about him. I mean, anything like this is a tragedy, and then when it includes the baseball family, obviously it's just a heartbreaker.
Yeah, I saw that Octavio Dotel was one of those guys that was in demand in the league, right? He played for a lot of teams. Teams are always trying to get him, trying to trade him, trying to bolster their bullpen with him, and very popular in the clubhouse as well. And just a really, really sad story. So all the best to the victims who lost their loved ones in that one. Just a terrible situation. Moving on to some other topics, though, that we had on the rundown for today. I was watching the Standalone. It was the only game that was on Friday night. The Friday schedule was a little strange last week because of home openers and all the different things. There were some there's the built-in off day for Thursday home openers. So the Guardians-Angels was a game being played kind of in isolation. So that was the game I chose to watch. I tuned in right as Jose Ramírez hit a homer off of Jose Soriano, and we're just gonna watch it if you're watching on YouTube. So first he takes a 2-1 hack at a down and in slider. Next pitch, another down and in slider, homers off of it. And this is something you see Jose Ramírez do from time to time.
That was a good pitcher tragedy.
That was a great frame hold. It was the second homer of the game that Ramírez had hit. I had not seen the first one, but I'm watching the Guardians feed. And the Guardians booth starts talking and saying, hey, did Jose Ramírez set up the second slider by swinging at the first one? And it got me thinking, I'd love to believe that. I mean, Jose Ramírez, future Hall of Famer, phenomenal player. Sure, of course, that could have happened. And I want to believe that happened. Is that what happened, Jed? Can you even make that call based on the one pitch before it? Because if anything, I feel like you have to look back maybe even further if you're going to get to that sort of level of setting a pitcher up to give you a pitch that you want.
Yeah, you hear a lot of stories about this from guys of yesteryear, right? Setting guys up, and it seems like a lot of even spring training, right? Like setting up a guy in spring training, so that I'm going to swing over his breaking ball so I get it in the season. I think the amount of times that Soriano has faced, or vice versa, that Jose Ramirez has faced Soriano, I really doubt it. And if you look at where the pitch, the first slider was intended to go, the catcher set up outside. He was not intending to yank or to throw that in that spot. And so I think it had a little bit more spin. He yanked it. It broke more probably than Jose Ramirez was anticipating. And then you look at, you look at where the next one is, the other home run that he hit there. One's a fastball, one's a slider. It's down over the middle of the plate. This is a spot that I know this is literally the exact same spot as a left-handed hitter. I don't know why it works out that way, but the low pitch for the lefties is generally a wheelhouse. And so you're talking about two pitches that are in the exact same spot. And so, maybe Jose Ramirez, he's certainly talented enough to set a guy up. So I can't speak definitively, but I think given where the catcher was set up and the ultimate outcome of that first slider, and just having it be yanked the way it was, I would highly doubt that he was setting him up. Soriano just made a mistake with the next one, and Jose made him pay.
I think you were on the Occam's razor side of this one too, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, put up the heat map that I've got. So this is the heat map of homers by lefties off of righty sliders, right? And so you see middle, duh. But you also see what Jed's talking about, low ones, right? However, it kind of gets lighter when you actually back foot it. So, righties throwing sliders to lefties are playing a tightrope game because they are trying to get where that first slider is. You see that little, the yellow 4 there. That was the fourth pitch at bat. They're trying to get there because that's where they get swings and misses. But if they get where the next pitch was, that's where homers are. So just according to the way the league goes, if you can back foot it and you can actually bury it, great. If you do what Jose Soriano did on that second pitch, not so great. And then from a shape perspective, hitters tend to get better at shapes the more they see it. So it's not that much of a stretch to say he saw the first slider and then the second one was the same shape, but in a better location. And I didn't even notice this until you played the other homer. The other homer was the same story. He saw the first fastball down, and then the second fastball was in a very similar location. So I think Soriano really should work on, mixing up he shouldn't be patterning the same way. He shouldn't be doing things where he's going to throw to the same spot with the same pitch twice in a row as much. I mean, especially not maybe to Ramirez, who's just like, hey, man, I just saw this pitch and this one's nicer.
Yeah, I don't know what the thinking was for like Logan O'Hoppe, I think, was behind the plate for that one. Like, what would cause you to throw Jose Ramirez of all people?
Well, this worked last time, so let's do it again, right?
Well, I could get it on the slider, but in that first homer with the fastball, like that seems like a really dangerous choice.
Yeah, and I think it ultimately comes down to execution, right? And if you look at the second at bat that Soriano had against Ramirez, which I think that they have success, right, with all the backdoor breaking balls, and this is exactly where O'Hoppe is set up, and he gets away with the fastball there, but everything is away, and then he finishes him off with the splitter away. And if you look at the third at bat in particular, O'Hoppe is set up in that same spot. So I think both of those pitches are just a matter of execution. And so I think that he just has to execute. So, Ohapi's set up away on both of those pitches. He misses one down and in, yanks it, the one that, Jose swings over the top of, which, like I said, I think just because of where it ended up, it broke more than it normally does. And then the next one, he was trying to go away and left it right over the middle of the plate. So to me, I think, Ohapi had a very different idea of where both of those pitches were supposed to be.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So Ohapi didn't necessarily call those exactly. That's right. But
yeah, I would have a hard time believing that Ohapi would be calling a slider in and setting up away.
Right. That's a good point. But then, from the other point, pitchers do miss on execution a lot. So one way that you can kind of get out from getting into this is call a splitter. Call a completely different pitch type. So if Soriano had a four seam, or if he trusted his splitter more, he might be able to avoid situations like this.
Well, he got the strikeout on the splitter, right? Yeah. So it's easy to sit here and play armchair quarterback on this, but I think the more, especially with a hitter like Jose Ramírez, the more he sees the pitch, the more advantageous position he's in. And, I think that he had 8 or 9 at bats before these and had, success. I think, what did we say? He had 1 home run prior to the game today, but it was a modest success rate before this. But like I said,
he had seen him some.
The more a hitter sees a pitcher, the more advantageous they're in. And then it really just comes down to execution. And I don't think that Soriano executed either one of those pitches that he gave up homers on the way that he intended. So I think, Ramírez had more of a visual database to go on in terms of pitch shape. And then a lack of execution led to, bad outcomes for the pitcher.
Yeah, I think there's a gap between the natural command of Jose Soriano and stuff. It's pretty wide right now. I don't know how much he'll close that over time. So a lot is going to
he is the guy who's missed a lot of time for injury. So it's not like he has as many reps as other people.
Right. So maybe there's still some room for improvement, but I do think game calling becomes much more important when you're dealing with that particular flaw.
Yeah, maybe even Ohapi knows that, I can't go to the backdoor breaking ball over and over again with Soriano against lefties because he will yank some of them, into the happy zone. So that's something I can do a little bit, but, if it's somebody as dangerous as Ramírez, maybe, call something else. So Ohapi's going to learn, I think, some too, even though you're right. He did not call those exact locations and pitches. He's going to learn over time where the misses are.
Exactly. And that's, you have to account for that, right? As a catcher, a good catcher will account for what the potential miss is, right? And so, as you showed with that heat map, if the danger zone is missing, over the middle of the plate, the miss has to be in the dirt, right? You'd rather have the guy hit him in the back foot than give up the homer. And so the backdoor slider, which they had success against, if the execution isn't, to the level that it's going to be, and the miss, trends towards the middle of the plate, you got to account for that as a catcher in the game that you're going to call.
You did bring up a good point, though. Maybe you were going to transition here, but you brought up a good point about the bulk of the interaction, and you were talking about in yesteryear there were more stories about this.
Yeah,
and we do know that hitters today see a lot more pitchers, just more of them, and see fewer at bats against them. It's just the balanced schedule going against AL and NL. There's more pitchers every year. We're using 900 pitchers, and 10, 15 years ago we were using 600 and 700 pitchers. So there's just you don't get the same volume of Rolodex one-on-one. But I did have this example from a story I used to do, and this is Greinke. Zach Greinke against Paul Konerko, they had 73 plate appearances against each other. They were in the same division. It wasn't necessarily a balanced schedule. They saw each other a lot. And Greinke said to me once, he said, Paul Konerko, you would change stances all the time. But this is one time, I'd quick pitched him, and there was this one time he came back at me, and he had this new stance where it looked like he wasn't ready at all, and then all of a sudden he'd go and swing. And this is it. Look, he doesn't even actually look that ready. He looks like he's going to take it.
Looked like he hit the upper deck, like foul.
And Konerko's looking at it, and Greinke's mad, and he's laughing because he knows what just happened. And I was like, Greinke, he quick pitched you. Like he made it look like he was going to take it. He wasn't ready, you know. And I asked Konerko about it, and he laughed, and he's like, yeah, maybe. But he also said, I used to be 2 tenths too early before the first pitch came. So sometimes I wait to see how long I could wait, how long I could be not tense. And I was so ready to hit that it didn't help me. So even in this occurrence where there might have been some gamesmanship between them, Konerko was actually doing something that was a little bit more self-focused. Like, even though it seems like he was really just effing with Zach Greinke there, he had a reasoning that was more hitter focused, which was, and I think that's what ends up happening. And I don't want to speak for Jed, who actually, played in the game, but like, I think that you're a little bit more focused on like, your game plan and what you're looking for and, seeing the ball than you are necessarily about all the other stuff. I mean, Joey Votto would famously do this thing where he would look out to the outfield and do these weird things with his eyes. And I asked him why he's doing that. And he's like, because the pitcher needs to be a ball release machine. I don't need to see him looking at me. I don't want to think of him as a person. We might be on the same team later, or I like him or I hate him. I don't want to think about any of that. I just want him to be a ball release machine all I want to do is find that location where he releases the ball and see the ball out of the hand. Yeah. And I think that's mostly what the focus of the hitter is, not necessarily what did my last swing look like, or what did I set him up, or any of that stuff.
Yeah. No, I just to kind of cap this off too, like I do think that there is, something entertaining about the chess match against guys who kind of know their own playing styles, right? Like they know each other really, really well. And, that I think that my guess is fans appreciate that too, right? Of not just seeing guys facing each other for the first time, but somebody who's faced each other 73 times, right? And there's so much history wrapped up in that. There's so much drama wrapped up in that in any given at bat moving forward, it really becomes more of a chess match, and how you're managing the stress, or where you are in the season, or all these other factors that go into it. It just creates a lot more levels that the individual matchup, as you get further into your career, becomes compelling.
Yeah, I think for a long time, there's been these debates about the value of batter versus pitcher data, people trying to predict outcomes for a variety of reasons, daily fantasy, whatever. But even just trying to understand what's happening, I think the samples are so small, they're never predictive. But I acknowledge that, and I always say, but there's no way they're meaningless, because you would see shapes, you would know tendencies, you would learn something about someone you see often. And even if you don't see them 63 times, which is the most you ever faced somebody, who'd you face the most, Jed? Do you remember off the top of your head?
No idea.
King Felix, actually.
Yeah, that was if I should have just gone out on a limb on that one, because I knew I'd faced him a lot, and I could probably visualize the movement of every single one of his pitches, today. But I always loved those at bats, because it felt like it was me up against this guy who, first of all, is probably going to be a Hall of Famer, and I got to see him early in his career. We faced each other at every level of our career, and I always loved that, because it felt more of a chess match, and I had more fun in those at bats, particularly late in my career. He wasn't throwing 98 anymore, But we just we were both these known commodities. We had this long history against each other, and every single one of them it felt a little bit more elevated and more fun to like step into a box against a guy that you had a long history with.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part of those samples, is that they change. Both people in that change. The pitcher's stuff is different. The hitter has various experience, might be stronger, might eventually lose bat speed. All those things are moving parts. And I think that's why they're not necessarily predictive, even though they're they're just
How did he do?
Important. How did he do?
Yeah, how did I do?
4 homers.
I know I got a couple. I think he got me early in my career, but I caught up to him at the end. I got a few homers off him. I know that.
It's 16 for 61. Looks like a walk and a sacrifice fly. So that's how you get the 3 plate appearances. 14 Ks against 1 walk, 4 homers.
4 homers, yeah.
4 homers. Get it to a 238 OBP.
Okay.
697 OPS.
You don't make your money off the Hall of Famers.
That's right.
It's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another question we had from our Discord, and it was focused on Elly De La Cruz, but I think we can broaden this to just switch hitters in general. And the question was about why are the Reds so patient with Elly De La Cruz, letting him hit from the right side against lefties when those splits are not nearly as good as what he does hitting from the left side against righties. So effectively, why not just have him hit lefty against lefties? Like what would be the downside of that? So Jed, what do you think gives teams patience with players who are switch hitters that do struggle initially upon arrival, at least on one side of the plate?
Yeah, let's be clear that, I think Elly De La Cruz is probably in a class of his own in this. You're talking about a guy who has, world class abilities athletically. And so if you're the Reds, you're going to be extremely patient with somebody like Elly De La Cruz, because of the, we all know the benefit of the split, right? Of hitting righties against lefties and lefties against righties. So you're kind of working with 2 players in one in that regard. So, I think the patience really just comes down to the organizational priorities and where they are in their winning cycle. If your expectations are to be winning right away, then there might be a shorter leash on a guy switch hitting. But I think the benefit of having that 2 hitter in one is well worth the investment in time if the player can figure it out. And I know, personally, it took me 4 years of time where I really honed in on a routine that I knew I could count on to produce every single day. The first few years of my career, it was a learning experience, and I was trying to refine that. But learning how to be a big leaguer, learning how to produce day in and day out takes time. And I think that really falls on the player first and foremost, but then the organization to help support that, and really refine what that approach and what that routine is going to be to prepare yourself to have the best possible outcomes and produce on a day in, day out fashion.
I mean, your 2 swings are different, right? Like, I mean, Pablo Sandoval was telling me that, he was a little bit more scoopy from one side, a little bit flatter from the other side, and that's something he always had to manage. So just how different were you from each side?
Yeah, I tried to simplify it as much as possible, and I tried to make the mechanics of the swing as close as I could, just from a simplicity standpoint. But the way I thought about it is my triggers were different. Like when I decided, when I recognized a pitch that was a pitch that I should swing at, or that I can do damage on, like, what's my trigger, right? My finger's on the trigger. What is it that's in my mind that makes me pull that trigger? And for right-handed, because I'm right-hand dominant, it was my right hand to the ball, right? Like, so I'm going right hand to the ball. Left-handed, because it wasn't my natural swing, I would tend to get a little lazier with my legs just because it wasn't the way I was wired. I would actually focus on my back leg. My back leg actually initiated my swing when I was going well. And so, and my hands just kind of moved to the ball from there. So really, yes, there was no way I was fooling myself if I thought that my swings were the same. And so I just had to be conscious of what my triggers were from both sides. What allowed me to efficiently move my bat to the ball, and without bogging down my mind with multiple thoughts.
Do you think you probably had the same bat speed from both sides?
I'm guessing I had a higher bat speed from the right side, but I think I had,
You had slightly more power from the right side.
Yeah, I think my raw power was higher from the right side, just because I like I said, when you're top hand dominant, you're more likely to kind of whip the bat through, which creates more speed, quite frankly. But I think I think that I was probably a little bit more accurate with the barrel from the left side.
Interesting. Just to go back to this Elly example, I mean, Elly himself is kind of an example of why you might stick with it, because in 2023, when he comes up, he has a 2 mile an hour difference on his bat speed. And we start talking about how different he is from both sides, right? And then in 2024, he has a 3 mile an hour difference in his bat speed. His fast swing rate is twice as high from the left as it is from the right, and we're really talking about it. Well, this year, his fast swing rate is higher from the right. His bat speed is higher from the right, and that speaks to your talk about investment. Here, he's not on this list. I have a list here of the biggest bat speed differences between the left and the right, and he's not on this list anymore. He's off the list. So, these guys are older guys where you kind of you may want to think about quitting it. However, if you're Ketel Marte and you're 73 miles an hour bat speed from the left and 77 from the right, you're not going to quit because 73 is still good, So that's why I color coded these, because you can be like, oh, most of these guys are actually pretty good from both sides. Yes, there might be a difference in Leody Taveras' output, versus lefties. He's a 73 mile an hour guy and he's 69.8 versus lefties. I mean, versus as a lefty, he's below. So, you may want to, what ends up happening is, I think that teams are aware of this and they'll let them switch hit, but you'll start to see them sometimes sit against the side that they have less bat speed. So we saw this a little bit with Tommy Edman in St. Louis. Now the Dodgers have been like, whatever, he's an everyday player. But there were times when Tommy Edman was more often in the lineup against lefties than he was against righties. And I bet it had something to do with their knowledge of kind of the mechanics of his swing against each side. But, if you are on that list and you're really struggling, let's say Tommy Edman was not good, they might come to him and say, hey, your bat speed is, like 3-4 miles an hour higher when you bat right-handed. It might be just better for you to have that bat speed than it is for you to see the ball better. I mean, because those are two things that are kind of different, right? Like if you were talking about different skills, like one is kind of seeing the ball well, that's better from if you switch sides, but one is the mechanics of getting the bat up to speed,
Yeah, and I think there's probably a commensurate level of bat speed that you have to, like, to your point with Ketel Marte, even though he's on that list, both sides are
yeah.
Exactly. And so but if you have someone who's just not able to produce the bat speed that is commensurate to positive results, then that's a much different conversation.
Like Jake Mangum is 28 and he's 64 miles an hour as a righty. Maybe don't do that. I mean, you're also trying to hang on in the big leagues. Just being able to get to 68 miles an hour with the bat as a lefty, it might be good enough. Like you get yourself a platoon role out there. But
and I think that's the platoon role of it too. Is just that might, to your point earlier with the way that St. Louis approached Tommy Edman, is that you might be listed as a switch hitter, but we're going to play you as a platoon player anyway.
Right. Yeah. And Ketel Ruiz is a catcher, so if he's 63 miles an hour as a righty, maybe put the other catcher in against lefties. You're gonna sit him sometimes anyway.
Find those matchups that he'll be in a more advantageous position. And I think it's probably not as simple as just saying, hey, just Tommy Edman face right on right. Like that's I anecdotally I didn't, when I started switch hitting in high school, that basically means I didn't face a right on right at bat since Babe Ruth, right? Till I was when I was 14 years old or 15 years old. And then left-handed in my life. I have never faced a left-on-left at bat in my life. And so, are you going to do that for the first time in the big leagues? And you think you're going to get positive results from that?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, how much of a freak are you, I guess, is the real question. Like, how quickly can you see those shapes and make those adjustments? That seems like it'd be really difficult to do if you're talking about a 5 or 10 year or some kind of longer layoff than that, where you haven't even been in that situation at all.
I mean, the Cedric Mullings example, I think he was like Jed, you're actually a little bit late to switch hitting if you kind of started in high school, I feel like.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think so.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen some guys in juniors and seniors that are already doing it. So I think Cedric Mullins was even later than that, or was just also just a late adopter of the switch hitting. So they were kind of like, your distance to not switch hitting is not that far. So, like you can try it, you can remember it, Right. The other thing that I think is fascinating, there's actually a link between this conversation and one we had earlier about batter versus pitcher, which is, if we are going to get to a good batter versus pitcher stat or predictive batter versus pitcher understanding, other than just like, this is what happened the last 10 bats between these two guys, I think it's more about the stuff we're talking about now. It's like, what's his bat speed from the left and the right? What's his bat shape from the left and the right? Is he scoopy? Is he scoopier from the left? Is he scoopier from the right? That's where we're headed for teams right now, where they're making these high level matchup decisions. Now, maybe during the season, some of these you don't emphasize it as much because who's healthy, who can play tonight,
Availability,
right? But sometimes in the postseason, if they're making a lineup, or as in September, if you're making a lineup and you're really thinking about who's pitching tonight, and I do have two options, sometimes you may go with the right on right if it's the scoopy guy, against the ground ball pitcher, as opposed to, your switch hitter who's flat from that side, So I think that's where we're headed in terms of doing batter versus pitcher, is kind of looking at the components of the swing.
Yeah, I think that will continue to evolve scouting reports and make life even more difficult for hitters trying to solve big league pitching, because it's not hard enough yet. We got to turn the dial up a little bit more if we can. Let's save weird park factors for next week, because that gives us more time to dig even further into those. I don't want to cut that conversation short. A few reminders on our way out the door. You can join our Discord with the link in the show description. Jed's on Instagram, just Jed Lowry over there. Give him a follow. Loves photography. So you can find us on Bluesky. I'm dvr.bscott@social. You can find Eno Saris.bscott@social. Thanks to our legendary producer, B. Smith, for putting this episode together. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.